When I was 10 years old, my sister and I were playing with walkie-talkies. We were just messing around, switching to different stations and talking to each other. Most of them were static, and we could barely make out what the other was saying. We did this for a few hours and got bored. Our parents were both at work, so we weren't allowed to go anywhere or do anything. We ended up setting the walkie-talkies down and we played in our room. What we didn't realize is we left the walkie-talkies on, and on a station of pure static. I went back to the living room on my way to the kitchen to get a drink, and realized the devices were still on. I headed over to turn them off so the battery didn't die, and as I reached down for the power button, I heard something. It was quiet and I couldn't make out what the sound was, so me being the stupid kid I was, hit the talk button. Hello? I then heard a voice on the other end and respond and said,
Hello? Can you help me?
I asked, who is this? And the voice said,
My name is Evan.
He sounded young. How old are you, Evan? I asked. At this point, he was crying, but it seemed as though I could hear him perfectly.
Hey.
Why are you crying? I asked.
I'm hurt pretty badly. Some guys grabbed me while I was playing in the woods and brought me to some shed at the bottom of a cliff. They cut me pretty badly. Please help me.
By this time, my 6-year-old little sister had come out of the room and heard everything. She was crying, and I knew we had to help him. Where are you from? I asked. He said he was from Forsyth, Missouri. With that, my heart dropped. I lived on the only cliff near Forsyth because I was literally only 10 minutes away from there. He then said,
I have to go now. They're back.
And the station was static again. I went onto my back deck and looked down the cliff towards the bottom and could lightly make out a shed at the bottom of the cliff. I ran over to the house phone and called the police and told them everything I knew. They came to my house. By this time, my parents were home, worried as to why the cops were there. About an hour went by and the ambulance came to my house. My mom came over and told me to take my sister inside, but I had just enough time to see a gurney covered with a bloody white sheet loaded onto the ambulance. An officer came up to me and said this boy's name was Evan Turret. He had been missing for over a month. He then went on to say this kid has been dead for over 3 weeks, and it was impossible that you knew about this. All this time I kept wondering how it was that I had been talking to him just hours before, and to be told he'd been dead for almost a month. I'll never forget my conversation from the other side.
Hello?
I never wanted to go on that stupid hike in the first place. Yet there I was, hiking cabin to cabin in the Norwegian mountains with my class. Woohoo, right? For a misanthropic misfit like myself, it was a nightmare. Let's just say I do my best behind my computer, talking to people over a microphone, not actually having to make eye contact. I tried getting out of it, but my parents weren't having it. They thought the fresh air would do me some good. Let me assure you, it did not. The first 2 days went mostly as expected. Me at the very back of my group, one of the chaperones occasionally trying to make awkward small talk and a half-hearted encouragement, and my classmates largely ignoring me. Surprisingly, the hike was actually almost enjoyable. The scenery was breathtaking. Misshapen warp birch trees were scattered all over the yellowing grass and the browning heather. Mountains rose on both sides, looming ominously. I thought I could even have liked it, if only my classmates hadn't. Like this, I somehow made it to day 3. By the end of it, I was lagging pretty far behind. The amount of physical activity was far higher than what I was used to, and it started getting to me. When I finally spotted the last cabin, the sun had set, and we were hiking by that gloomy blue half-light that lingers in the after the northern sun sets. It looked huge, imposing in the distance. The cabin, actually, it was a set of cabins, a campground, and rather a large main house. I bet it could house hundreds of people if it had to. It looked out of place, there in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the mountains. By the time we finally got there, the rest of the group had eaten dinner, and we were hanging out in the common area. I got to eat with my teacher, who had to hang back to make sure the rear, i.e. me, made it all the way, which is how I learned that the place was closed for the season. So only our group of 30 or so teenagers were sleeping there. Our teacher knew the people who ran it, and he had organized it so they'd just drive in with the food for us and leave us to it. So there we were, about 30 kids, 2 teachers, and this vast, empty space of the mountains and valleys. I didn't want to interact with the others, and I wanted to be asleep, or believably pretending to be asleep, when the rest of the guys I'd share my room with went to bed. I was exhausted, a little embarrassed by how slow I had been, and as it turned out, completely without a cell signal. So staying up had nothing in it for me. I headed straight to my room and promptly fell asleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up in a panic. The room was pitch black. Usually our rooms weren't that dark. These places never managed to keep the light out completely. Light would seep through them from the hallway. The moon would shine through a gap in the curtains. Some red light would be blinking on some appliance. Something would pierce the darkness. But this one was pitch black. I was sure someone was in the room, standing above my bed, looking at me. You know, one of those silly things you think of. My breath caught in my throat and my heart beat like crazy. I lay there for what felt like hours. Nothing happened, of course. Nothing happened. I tried to talk myself down in my head. I was being silly. I was safe. There was just miles and miles of empty woods and hills around here, where anything could be hiding, could have followed us, could have seen us, defenseless and alone. No, you're safe, I told myself. Don't be silly. I wanted to turn on the light, but I didn't want to piss the others off. But I really wanted to turn on that light. As a sort of compromise, I decided to go to the bathroom. It meant I could turn on the light in the hallway and sneak a peek back into the room. I sat up, swung my legs off to the side of the bed, and felt around for my shoes. I put them on and snuck out the door and flicked the light switch. I glanced back into the room. Nothing there. Of course, I just had to make sure. I walked down the hallway until I found the bathroom. There was freezing. Someone had left the window open. Ha, I thought. Someone took a shit. Nice of them to tear it out, I guess. But when you leave a window open in Norway, in the mountains, in the middle of October at night, it gets really, really cold. I did my business and walked over to the window to close it. Not that I cared about those other idiots. They could freeze in the morning for all I cared. But still, you just don't leave windows open when it's cold out. As I went to close it, I looked out in the window and caught a glimpse of the night sky. It was covered in stars, and there, right above the nearest mountain, a vague green blob was materializing. Northern lights? This far south? My heart almost stopped. I had never seen northern lights in my life. We hardly ever get them this far south as where I live. So I tippy-toed back into my room, grabbed my phone and my coat, and headed out into the fall night. For a second I debated whether I should wake the guys. They'd probably love seeing the northern lights just as much as I would. Screw them, I decided. Not like they'd wake me up if the tables were turned. Frost covered the ground, glittering in the strange green light from the sky. It was the northern lights. Not particularly strong, not very defined, but undeniable still. Nothing else turns the night sky green like that. I stood there staring at the sky, freezing for hours. The fear from earlier had completely gone. I stood there, so small, so insignificant, under the stars and the strange green light that flickered across the skies, completely mesmerized. Finally, my whole body started shaking, and I realized I was freezing. I had to go back inside, no matter how beautiful all this was. My eyes had adjusted to the dim light from the outside, so I snuck down the corridor without turning the lights on. I knew the bright light would blind me, and I didn't want to burn out the beautiful memories of the aurora to place it with the grim fluorescent light that lined in the hallway. I used the light on my phone to identify my room, and turning it off, snuck back into my warm bed and promptly fell asleep. I awoke with a start and groped around on the floor for my phone. 10:30 it read. Shit, I had overslept. Breakfast was at 7:30 and we were supposed to be hiking by 9. Shit, I thought. I jumped out of bed and almost hitting my head on the bunk bed above me. Why hadn't anybody woken me up? The blinds were still down and the room was dark. I opened the door, and the corridor outside was dark as well. The whole place was quiet. I flicked the light switch. The power was out. A chill ran down my spine. Was something wrong? The room was dead quiet. No snoring from the boys. I was clearly the only one there. Questions trudged through my sludgy morning brain. Was it some sort of prank? Leave the weirdo behind? But the teachers wouldn't have gone along with it, would they? Did they forget about me? The slow burn of worry started in my gut. I was all alone in the wilderness. All that empty space. Wait, no, there was a road. I had my phone. Someone could come get me. I wasn't lost, I was just forgotten. Actually, they probably hadn't even left me behind. Maybe there was a storm or something. Maybe the hike was canceled. I yawned. Even if they had left me, it just meant that someone would have to come get me, and I didn't have to hike the last leg of the trip. Fine. I grabbed my jacket, put my feet into my shoes, and set off to find some people or some food. Preferably both. I was still half asleep as I shuffled into the dining room. I registered that it was also empty. Breakfast was clearly over, as the teachers had promised it would be. I was hungry though, and I crossed my fingers that I had find some leftovers in the kitchen. I pushed open the door with the staff-only sign, shuffling across the linoleum floor, opening the fridge, and to my delight, found it was still full. The pantry as well. I made myself a sandwich and my mood improved considerably. I might be left behind, but I was left behind with the food. It wasn't all bad. I munched on my sandwich while considering what to do next. I went to make a second one when it occurred to me that there was a lot of food there, like too much. This was all the food we would have needed for the breakfast. The others hadn't eaten. The uneasy feeling came back. Why would they have left without eating? It made no sense. unless something had happened. Again, I thought of the vast wilderness, of the lonely road, of everything that could be hiding in the mountains, in the house, in the rooms. God, no, there were so many rooms, empty cabins, empty spaces, closed doors with God knows what behind them. I should have checked the rooms. Why hadn't that been my first move? Because I didn't want to. I thought of opening all those doors, finding them all empty. Or worse yet, not finding them empty. The fear started growing within me. I knew I had to do something, and do it before I was totally paralyzed by panic. So I gathered up all my courage and got to my feet and left the kitchen. The sound of my steps rang out through the cavernous dining room. They seemed so much louder now. My heart was pounding by the time I tippy-toed down the dark hallway. The only window was at the far end, and the sky was covered in clouds. It didn't do very much to light up the corridor, and it did nothing for my fear. I found myself stopping just outside my room. I already knew that it was empty, but I still wanted to check there first. Maybe because I was so sure it was empty, I felt like it was a safe place to start. Or maybe because deep down, I knew something was very, very wrong. The blinds still kept the room completely in the dark, so I couldn't see anything in there. I crossed the room in 2 long strides. What little daylight seeped through the gray sky would still be a welcome friend in this quiet gloom. I tugged at the string, and I jumped a little, as the sound of the curtain rolling up rang out sharply through the empty room. I turned around, and to my great surprise, Peter, one of the guys, was lying in his bed opposite of mine, clearly fast asleep. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't alone. "Peter," I croaked. I cleared my throat. "Peter," I repeated a little louder. No response. It occurred to me that it made no sense that he was still here. There were so many reasons why he should not be asleep in his bed right now, and he looked oddly still. I took a step toward him. "Peter," I whispered, heart beating in my throat. I reached out, grabbed his arm under the covers, and I shook. No response. He seemed totally dead. The thought hit me like a ton of bricks. Dead. No way. Absolutely not. It couldn't be. I forced my shaking hand towards his neck to feel for a pulse. My fingertips made contact with his icy skin, and I knew instantly, dead. Nobody alive can be that cold. He had been dead for hours. My knees gave out from under me, and I crashed to the floor. Peter was dead, just lying there, next to me. He had been dead this whole time. I had walked in and out of the room, I had eaten breakfast, and he had been dead this whole time. Oh God. I vomited on the floor. Somehow I made it to my feet. I had to check the other bunk. I had to find help. I couldn't be here all alone with a corpse. The other bunks weren't empty either. The 2 other boys in the room were as cold and as dead as Peter. I only remember bits and pieces from the next few hours. I recall running wildly down the hallway, tearing open doors. Not all of them were unlocked, but the ones that were revealed more dead bodies. Everyone, all the rooms, they were all stone cold dead, and I was alone. I think I screamed a lot because my throat hurt like hell. When I finally entered a sort of catatonic trance that could be construed as calming down, it could have been just the vomiting though. I'm fairly sure it happened multiple times. I was lying in a fetal position at the end of the hallway, outside my dead teacher's room. I was shaking convulsively. I had no thought for my own safety. I had given no consideration to why they were all dead. All I knew was that I was alone in a house full of dead people. I don't know what part of me kicked into gear, but finally it occurred to me that I should call the police. That's what you're supposed to do when people are dead. You call the police, and they take care of it. Except I didn't have any reception. The part of my brain that was still running some sort of script figured I should go for a high point. There was a hill behind the hostel. I grabbed my phone and I started hiking. It took me exactly 2 hours and 37 minutes to get a single bar on my phone. At this point, my battery was down to 4%, and my panic was back to 97%. I typed 112 with shaking fingers, and I prayed as the phone rang. No battery. Send people to the the hut. They're dead. They're all dead. Please, please. I managed to yell to the operator before the phone died. I shook the phone helplessly. I turned it back on and the light flickered across the screen. That stupid opening graphic. I frantically typed my PIN, pressed the phone icon, typed in 112, and watched the phone turn itself off. I stared in disbelief at this useless piece of technology in my hand. My only hope was they had gotten the message. Had I said my name clearly? Would they even believe me? Did it sound like a prank call? I stood there until the sweat on my back chilled to my bone, and I realized I needed to get moving. I wasn't going back to that tomb, no way. I decided I would go back down and follow the road, and only then did it occur to me to wonder why they were dead. You'd think that'd be my first thing on my mind, but it wasn't. Only at that moment, when I was freezing cold, with my last piece of technology, my last avenue of communication gone, did it occur to me. What the hell had happened? Had someone, something, done this? Should I be dead too? Should I hide? I went over the morning in my head. If someone wanted me dead, I would have been. If someone had done this, they were long gone, unless they left me alive on purpose, unless they left me alone to watch me panic, to watch me run around and panic. Someone who killed 30 people would enjoy that, wouldn't they? The chase, the game. No, I told myself firmly, that's not it. I ran through a list of plausible explanations in my head. There was no blood, no signs of trauma. They looked like they had been poisoned, really. But we all ate the same thing, though. Maybe it was something in the air. Wait, carbon monoxide poisoning? Yes, that could be it. No, really, that did make total sense. You hear these horror stories, right? Busted heater, whole family dead. Why not a whole school class? Made much more sense than some crazed serial killer. Contrary to what the Scandinavian nor crime novels will have you believe, Scandinavia does not have a lot of serial killers, and carbon monoxide poisoning happens. And I had spent hours outside last night, while the others were suffocating, enjoying the beautiful lights, the lights that I didn't tell them about. Somewhat calmed by that rational explanation, I turned to head back. I made a deal with myself to go past the hut, but I didn't have to head back inside. Just follow the road until I hit the police or some sort of civilization. I turned back around, taking in the view from up on top of the hill for the first time. And I got a look at the hostel surrounding the fields, and my perfectly rational explanation shattered along with my fragile sliver of calmness. Down there in the field surrounding the huts, I could clearly see a perfect circle of dead brown grass. The main building where we had slept was at the very edge of it, which meant that where I had been standing last night was just outside that circle. And inside that circle, everything was dead. I don't think carbon monoxide can do that. The police were there when I came back. I honestly don't remember the details of what happened next. I doubt they would be interesting anyway. 2 things you should know though. 1, they said it was carbon monoxide poisoning, that I had somehow escaped because I was outside. Nobody said anything about the circle, not ever. When I asked, I was told to drop it, that grass sometimes dies. And 2, the northern lights had not been visible that far south that night. In fact, they hadn't been visible anywhere on the mainland of Norway for weeks. This event took place when I was about 13. I'm 24 now. I'm a female and I have moved around a lot with my family as my dad was in the military. At the time, my family and I were living in Virginia, near the historic Triangle area. We lived on a military base that had a lot of wooded land, with a few roads through it for people to bike on, and for the standard military stuff. My family and some friends and I would bike on these roads often. It was very relaxing, and as we traveled in a group, we weren't worried about coyotes or bears or anything. However, we kids were told very sternly to never go back on those roads without a parent, and to never, ever split from the group when biking. My best friend at the time and I chalked it up to them being afraid of us being hurt by hunters. The base often allowed hunters in to help take care of the crazy deer population, or to keep us away in case the military was doing their thing back there. We were on one of our bike rides, about 3 families in a group. My best friend and I started lagging behind, and eventually we were at the back of the group. As we rounded a corner, I kid you not, a snake fell from the tree branches above onto my handlebars. I naturally wrecked and freaked out, refusing to get back on my bike. I know, the temper tantrum of the century. My friend laughed and just rode off. The traitor. I stood there staring at my bike and then down the road and back to my bike. I wasn't getting back on that thing and basically said screw it. Looking back as it was, we were not too far out. I knew the roads very well, even the gravel ones, because my dad would drive me around there in his Jeep. So I was confident as I walked back down the road and turned down a dirt road. As I'm walking down this road, I start hearing a rustling behind me. I shrug it off, thinking it was just a rabbit since we had seen quite a few on the ride. The rustling grew closer, and then past me, and then to the front of me, and then it stopped. I stopped and decided to bark to scare it off. Branches snapped in response, and I screamed and took off running. Classically, I run in the direction of my home, which was right by this thing. I hear a growl, but it wasn't like a dog growl. It was deeper, but I'm not sure how to describe this. Multiple pitches all rolled into one, and it was chilling. I ran like my life depended on it, and this thing just kept pace with me. Branches snapping and leaves rustling, and still keeping up in the woods that I couldn't make out what it was. The road curved sharply to the left, and my feet slid out from under me as I tried to take the turn. I ended up sliding off the road into a little ditch before the woods began. I'd say it was about a 3-foot grassy area off the road. As I scrambled to my feet, pretty sure I was crying, the thing's growl turned into a laugh. I bolted, I ran and I ran, but I didn't feel like I was getting any closer to home. After the curve, I should have seen the main road, but I didn't see it. Off to the left, before the main road, there would be a little ruin of sorts. And in my frantic mind, I thought if I could maybe get to that ruin, I would be safe. This thing was crashing through the woods on my right, and I saw my life flash before my eyes. I saw the ruins, and I could have laughed in relief had the thing not been chuckling yet again. I could hear it starting to move in, and I jumped, dived, I fell into the foundation of this ruin. It was 4 walls with an open doorway that I ran into. I don't know why I thought I would be safe in there, but I think it to this day. I would have never made it home. The thing was just toying with me. It would have soon moved in, but as it was, as I turned around in the dirt and looked back to the doorway, I only saw fur. Not the brown red of coyotes, it was black and it was wiry looking. I didn't see a face, just the fur and these mangled legs. The joints didn't look quite right. They were like normal dog legs, but the joints were backwards. I would have thought it was going in the other direction, but it was clearly moving to the right when the legs were bent like it was going to the left. It growled, and it sounded meaner than the earlier growls. I expected to turn around and charge through the doorway at any minute, but it just circled the ruin before going back off into the woods. I didn't leave the ruin until a base police officer found me. She looked terrified. My dad recently told me that she had seen hoof prints that had paw pad prints mixed in with it, like some weird goat-wolf hybrid, and that she heard laughter behind her as she grabbed me and practically threw me into her truck. We didn't speak until we reached my house, where my parents were waiting to hug me and yell at me. I didn't tell them what chased me, but when my dad told me years later what the officer saw, I finally told him. I don't know what it was. The deformed legs made me think skinwalker. And every time we went riding after that, I would hear growling and catch glimpses of black fur in the woods. I don't know what it was, but I know for sure it was hunting me. One thing I still don't know is, why didn't it come into the ruin after me? It was the summer of '83. It's hard to explain the atmosphere, but it seemed almost magical. MTV actually played music. Wrestling was real, though we did start having our doubts.
I think this is fake.
You think it's fake? What's that? Is that fake? Huh?
Atari was getting pretty popular, but kids still played outside every day. There was no bicycle helmets and knee pads with overly sensitive parents. Just a sense of adventure, good times, good friends, and something new every day. I was around 9 years old. I don't remember the exact day, but it was June or July and it was hot. The kind of humid hot you only get in the deep south. I lived in an apartment complex called Hidden Oaks in Albany, Georgia. I even remember the apartment number, 123. Not sure why I can't remember to buy milk, but some little things just stick with us. I was on my bike, feeling pretty proud of myself. I had recently gotten off training wheels. Yeah, I know I was a little late, but we were poor and it was a while before I ever got a bike. It was getting late and the sun started to set. So I left my friend's place and stopped by the military ditch along the way. It was across the parking lot of an apartment just past a small section of woods. It was a man-made ditch that was cemented and went into an angle at 45 degrees down. I'd say it was about 2 to 3 stories deep. It was only about 4 feet across at the bottom and went into a 45-degree angle back up. Imagine a large V shape, but with a flat point at the bottom. Once you got past the trees, it got much quieter, even cooler. The large trees would block out the sunlight, and you could hear the small trickle of water running below at the bottom of the basin. After staring into it a bit, getting thoroughly creeped out, I head back home with my playing cards and my spokes echoing off the side of the apartment. Now this may seem weird, but hear me out. Also, it's relevant to the story, so yeah. Here I was, a 9-year-old boy, and for whatever reason, I had started getting into drawing hearts. Now I know what you're thinking, but what I was drawing was not exactly innocent. I would draw the outline of a heart and then proceed to draw weird Gothic-like designs on the inside. Maybe I was a weird kid, who knows. I was in my room bored and I wanted to draw one of those hearts with some markers I had. I think I looked around for paper or something, I can't recall, but I looked over and on my dresser I had some stuffed toys. One in particular stood out because the bottom of his feet were white and flat. It was an old vintage bunny that had a very real look and not so real at the same time. One thing that struck me was it had red eyes. It was not like the cutesy large-eyed bushy toys of today. I have attached a picture to get the closest idea of what it looked like. It was even old to me, and looking back I think it must have been passed down. I just had always had it. I grabbed it, I sat on the floor with my markers in hand and just kind of stared into its eyes a bit. I don't think I was scared or anything, I mean, it was just a toy. So I drew my initials on its foot, CR, and quickly realized there was no way I could do detail with a heart. The bottom of its foot was velvety, so it was just impossible to do anything with it. So I drew a black outline and filled the rest in with red. I looked at my handiwork and I was pretty happy. So I played with it for the first time, well, since ever. It got late, so I went to bed and I had it laying on my pillow next to me. The morning came and I woke and I looked over to see my handiwork on the bunny again. Well, it wasn't there, so I assumed it must have fell off the bed. I looked over and nothing. I was so confused as to where it could be. I was so sure I had it in bed with me last night. I looked around the rest of the apartment, except where my parents were sleeping, and well, it was just gone. A few hours passed by, and I had kind of forgotten about it, and I went outside. This is where it's going to get kind of hard to explain and weird. Oftentimes in movies, you will hear people say they felt pulled to something. Well, for me, I felt I was supposed to do something. Like in my mind, I'm the one who made the conscious decision, the choice to do what I did next. I didn't go my usual route. This time I started heading straight to the marine ditch. The atmosphere was anything but exciting. It was dull, and everything was unusually quiet. The clacking of the cards seemed to be reverberating back more loudly, because there was just no other sounds. I was getting closer to the woods leading out to the ditch. Even though I had made the decision, I felt a sense of dread as I got closer. The shading seemed darker, more ominous the closer I got. I started to ask myself, why am I doing this? Or maybe that's what I thought as I got older. but what I do know is I could not stop pedaling towards it. Honestly, this part is hard for me to write, but I go just beyond the woods and I still can't get over how silent it was to this day. I put my feet down and I walk up to the edge of the ditch while still seated on my bike. I look down in the ditch and at the bottom was a fog, following along the trail of water. The fog was moving very slowly, and it covered the entire base of the ditch at the bottom as far as I could see. I was mesmerized. I had never seen that, and I guess it was because it was early and the dew and humidity was setting in. As I was staring up ahead, I saw an opening in the fog, a hole for some reason where I could see just below it. I kept staring at the hole as it kept getting closer to me. It felt as if though it was alive. It never seemed to change shape as it moved. It stayed as it was the entire way, slowly getting closer, and I could not seem to pull away. Then it happened. Almost directly below me, as I'm looking through it, I see it. Those red eyes, and it was dirty, sitting up against the bank staring right at me. I froze with fear. Even in my young mind, I was rationalizing this was not possible. I was trying to process this, and then I saw its feet, and there it was, my initials, CR, and the heart on the bottom of its foot. The spell was broken. Terror set in, and it took all I had to move. Its head turned and followed me. Words cannot describe that kind of terror. I took off home too scared to even cry. I never told anyone. I was a kid, but I was old enough to know no one would believe me. Heck, it's still hard for me to believe, and it happened to me. I wish I could say it ended there, but life is never as you want it to be. Months went by. Fall was setting in. My friends wanted to play some baseball, and there was only one place to play. And you guessed it, near that ditch. I had avoided that place like the plague, as you can imagine. I couldn't say anything, of course, so go and my mind's not in the game at all. I could just feel its presence behind me. It wasn't long before somewhat of a friend of mine named David knocked it right into the parking lot. It hits the concrete, flies out behind those very trees. We were kids, and it was our only ball, of course, so he exclaims he will go get it. I tried to stop him. I'm sure I should fear my voice, but what could I say? I followed him, I guess somehow to keep him safe. I don't know. I just had to be sure. David is ahead of me, and sure enough, that ball went down the ditch and landed exactly where that bunny used to be. As I'm about to tell him not to go, he's already sliding down to the bottom. Once below, I plead with him to come back, and of course he just looks at me confused. The ball is just on the other side. As he steps into the water to reach down to grab the ball, he suddenly stops. Time seems to stand still, and he just sits there frozen. It seemed like forever. I call his name, but he's just standing hunched over, reaching for the ball in an odd position, not even moving. He turns pale. I call his name again. David? Blood starts to pool up from the water, flowing down the stream, straight out of a horror movie. I'm sitting there, frozen, and I'm waiting. Finally, he starts to move. He lifts his foot up, and this massive shard of glass is clean through, glistening with blood. The blood, his look, and everything that had happened. I screamed, and I ran home as fast as I could. I don't even remember the run there. My parents saw me and was trying to figure out what was going on. but I was unable to even speak. Soon after, I heard the ambulance outside. I never saw him again after that. A few months had passed by and we moved, and everything that was once childlike and magical to me died after that. I do wonder at times what happened to him, but the memory of those eyes staring into me, I will never forget. When I was about 9 years old and my brother was 8, we had an experience that was hard to explain. It started when we were in bed. Now, we didn't sleep together, but we do have rooms across from each other, with a bathroom and a hallway separating us. Our house is 1 story, and both my brother and I have rooms that have a window that lead out to 2 separate porches, a front porch and a back porch. My window was located in the front, and my brother's was located in the back. Obviously, an ideal setup for an intruder that wanted easy access to a middle-class family. I mean, back then my brother and I were pretty expendable, so yeah. Anyway, we were in bed talking across the hall from each other while in bed. We had to lean out from our beds to see each other while we talked from my view. I could see him in the window that led to the back porch. The window had its blinds down, so I could not see what was outside of it, if there was anything. We were talking and an hour passed by, and we were getting tired, so we said our goodnights and tried to settle in for the night. I was drifting off when I heard it. A whistle. Not just one, but a few. It was not like a standard whistling either. Rather, it was like going along a tune. The only way I could describe it, its manner was sing-songy. The whistling was coming from my brother's room, so I assumed it was him. But why would he be whistling like some barber from the 1950s? It was so strange and creepy that I leaned out of my bed to tell him to shut up. But instead, I saw my brother staring back at me with the same bewilderment on his face. So I asked,
Was that you?
No, I thought that was you.
The hair on the back of my neck was up at attention. I was pretty terrified at this point, but I had to figure out what was going on. I got out of my bed and I rushed into my brother's bedroom. I jumped into his bed and we just stared at the window, waiting to meet our maker. We waited for a good 10 minutes for anything and nothing came. We were doubting that we even heard whistling when we heard it again. Same tune, same cadence, same song. This time it was longer, more pronounced. Who the hell was out there casually whistling at 11 at night? My brother and I were paralyzed with fear and could not move. We clutched each other as we heard what we thought to be a mass murder outside of my brother's window. And then it stopped, as abruptly as it started. Then there was a huge crash on the back porch that sent us in a massive panic. I scrambled out of my brother's bed and sprinted to my parents' room. My brother and I woke my parents out of their slumber to warn them of the person that was terrorizing us on the back porch. Thankfully, they took us seriously and climbed out of bed. They walked to the back door as we followed. When they opened the door, there was a hush that fell over everything. The only thing that could be heard were the crickets chirping in the dark. However, the porch was soaked in light from the motion sensor floodlights on the corner of the house nearest my brother's window. I don't know whether there was someone outside of my brother's window or not, but the whistling I heard that night was the single most frightening thing I've heard in my life. The whistling has not happened again at my house, but it has haunted me and my brother for many years. My wife and I moved into our new apartment just a few months ago. It was a downgrade from our previous home, as we lived in a large but quaint cottage. It had been my wife's dream home for the 3 years we lived there. We didn't want to leave, but it was a necessary step for us. You see, Jessica used to live down south. Everything was going well for a while, but my law firm decided to promote me out of the blue. It was unexpected, but very much appreciated. Unfortunately, the job entailed transferring to another one of our many locations. The one in question was located in New England. We spoke long and hard on the matter, and after much deliberation, Jess agreed to move. It's important to note that the dollar doesn't stretch as far up north as it does down south. It's also harder to find employment. That's why we were downgrading our living spaces. Until Jess could find another job, we would have to suffer. At least that's the way she looked at it. Tensions were high the first week after the move. I could tell Jess was irritable. She missed our old house, our old friends, and working on a steady job, she had nothing to do with her time, so she was bored out of her mind. This led to many fights. For a while, it seemed like we would never settle in. About a month after the move, things started looking up. Jess found temporary work as a part-time editor at the local TV station. She loved the work, and I couldn't have been happier with her coworkers. It seemed like everything was going fine. Not perfect, but fine. This is when the sleep talking began. It was to be expected, and honestly, I'm surprised it didn't start up sooner. You see, my wife is a restless sleeper. Whenever there's a big change in her life, good or bad. It happened when we got married, and when she moved into our first home, and when she had the miscarriage. I'll touch on that more later. Jess knows she sleep talks, as I used to bring it up from time to time. I would laugh each morning, recalling the weird things she said the night before. This always made her uncomfortable. She seemed to be embarrassed by it. That's why after her first night of sleep talking in our new apartment, I didn't say anything. The sleep talking went on for a couple of weeks. It was at this time that her temp job at the TV station came to an end. Without a job to keep her mind off things, her nightly outbursts became worse. She began screaming at odd times during the night, in which I would be forced to calm her down. One night, her scream turned into tears. As she was crying, she said something I'll never forget.
I wish you were dead.
I knew my wife was asleep, but as I sat there by her side, calming her the best I could, I felt the need to press the matter. You wish I were dead, hun? To my surprise, she responded. This caught me off guard. It's a strange thing to want your husband dead, and even stranger when you're asleep. Why? I asked.
You're ruining my life.
Those 4 words cut deep. Whether they were meant or merely the product of a tired mind, they were the kind of words that demand self-reflection. I wondered for a moment if I really was ruining her life, or at least if I were to blame her for the night terrors. My wife remained silent for the rest of the night. I know this because I stayed up. Contemplation and worry kept me from a good night's rest. I didn't believe for a second that my wife actually wanted me dead, but her late-night antics were certainly a cause for concern. Between the screaming episodes and the morbid dialogue, this was her worst condition that had ever been. The next morning came. I came pretty damn close to telling her about what happened, but I kept thinking about how she would react and what she'd say. It was too much. I didn't want to burden her any more than I already had, especially after she'd just been laid off. In light of this, I kept my mouth shut. The following night, the screams were gone. This was a comfort, but a fleeting one. Out of the blue, just as I was about to shut my eyes and call it a night, the sleep talking commenced once again.
Sometimes I anything about how I'll do it.
I chalked this statement up to pure dream-induced nonsense, but then she continued.
While you're asleep, in bed, I'll get up and go to the kitchen.
I didn't know what she was talking about, but as she kept speaking, it dawned on me. There were some moments of inaudible gibberish, but from the bits and pieces that were fluent, I could paint a pretty good picture of what she was saying.
Reach into, grab knife, over and over again, blood oozing off the bed, can't run my life anymore.
Reach into, grab knife, over and over again, blood oozing off the bed, can't ruin my life anymore. My wife was describing her plan to murder me. As deeply unsettled as this was, I couldn't help but chuckle to myself. It was just a dream after all. Nothing more. I can't say I haven't done some weird things in my own dreams. Things I would never do in real life. Jess was mad at me over the move, and she was working out her frustrations while she was asleep. At least that's what I was convincing myself. The sleep talking continued for a few weeks. I hoped that her midnight venting sessions were doing her some good, but without a degree in psychology, I couldn't be certain. All I could do was listen to her ramble about offing me each night and wait for her condition to run its course. The longest her sleep talking had ever lasted was a month, so it was safe to say it would be over soon. A month passed, and then two. Jess, she didn't let up. Every night it was the same routine, either incoherent nonsense or babblings about how she would like to hurt me. It was getting old, but one night changed everything.
I lost my baby because of you.
My emotions swirled about and a formed sour concoction that rested in the pit of my stomach. This time I had known what she meant. What do you mean, hun? There was a brief moment of silence, but eventually Jess offered me an answer. There was more gibberish mixed in, but she was able to get her point across.
You made me want kids. You put life in me. Now I'm alone.
This struck a nerve and caused a few tears to roll down my cheek. It was my idea to try and have a kid. Jess never wanted children, but she made herself want to for me. That's why, after the miscarriage, I was surprised to find her absolutely devastated. I had no clue how much she'd warmed up to the idea of having a baby. My tears were interrupted by more sleep talking of the worst variety.
I will kill you. I promise.
That was the last thing she said all night. It's been roughly a week since my wife made that promise. As disturbing as that threat was, I could have easily brushed it off with the rest, assuming it too was the product of stress and nothing more for me to worry about. Unfortunately, I can't stop worrying about it. Jess is scaring the crap out of me. I'm now taking short naps and sleeping with one eye open, and it's all because of one thing. At first I thought she was just getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. It quickly became apparent this was not the case. She would wander around our room, seemingly searching for something, and when I called out her name, she wouldn't respond. I tried to remain calm, but she had never sleptwalked before. This and her malicious sleep-talking put me on edge. I ended up telling her about it one morning, not the sleep-talking, but the sleepwalking. I hoped she would have shed some light on the issue, or at least opt for some help or medication of some sort. She did neither. After telling about it, she laughed. She couldn't believe she sleptwalked for the first time, and this amused her. She wasn't all concerned, it seemed. I did my best to mirror Jess's carefree stance on the subject. This became more and more difficult as time went on. She kept sleep-talking and sleepwalking, It wasn't until one night in particular, in which they occurred at the same time, that I became truly worried. Jess shuffled out of bed, waking me up in the process. I sighed in disappointment, knowing it was another one of her episodes. I kept still so as to not startle her, though I remained alert, lending a cautious ear to the room, mapping out her movements in my mind for the sake of my own safety. I didn't want this sleepwalking version of Jess anywhere near me. She gave me the creeps. As she stumbled about the room, I patted myself on the back for hiding the one thing I didn't want her to find. I was so spooked the first night she sleptwalked that I took all the sharp knives out of the kitchen drawer and put them in a shoebox underneath my bed. I still didn't think she was going to kill me, but you can never be too safe. Knowing the only weapons in the house were hidden, I felt secure and almost fell back asleep. Jess put an end to that. A few words that told me the knives were not what she was looking for.
Where's my baby?
Startled, I jumped in an instant. I must have drifted off for a moment, because I hadn't even noticed that Jess was standing right next to me. I looked her up and down, and sure enough, she was still asleep. Her eyes were glazed over, and her eyelids were drooping. It took me a moment to gather my wits and process what she had asked. "You don't have a baby, hun?" Jess's head tilted to one side, almost as she was confused.
You took my baby from me.
This was about the miscarriage again. I wondered if awake, Jess would feel the same way. I wondered if she was still holding on to her unborn child. "I didn't take anything, hun." It was hard to see in the dark, but I swear her facial expression went sour when I said that.
You gave me life. You took it away.
I didn't have it in me to keep arguing. I mean, how does one reason with someone who's unconscious? I stayed silent and waited patiently for her to go back to bed. After a minute or two, she finally did. Upon lying down, she turned to me and offered one last sentiment.
I will kill you.
The next day, I was more than a little bit off. I was so rattled by that last incident that I couldn't even bring myself to eat breakfast. Jess, she noticed this and asked me what was going on. At first I told her it was nothing, just a lack of sleep. This was partly true, but it wasn't the real reason for my anxiousness. It clawed at me until I finally came clean about the whole ordeal. I told Jess everything. I didn't leave a single detail out. She kept quiet while I spoke, so I had no clue what was going on through her head. After absolutely everything was out in the open, I shut my mouth and waited for her reaction. I was greeted with silence. "Well, do you have anything to say, or?" She looked at me with sad eyes before she spoke.
I guess this means I need help.
I was relieved to hear her say this. What was happening was a big problem for both of us, but I knew we could overcome it together. Just asked some more questions about her nightly adventures, and we talked a little more about what to do next. A big weight had lifted off my shoulders, so it settled then. I'll call Dr. Harrison and set up the appointment for tomorrow. Dr. Harrison was the physician for both our families. We'd been seeing him since we were children, and that's actually how we ended up meeting later on in our college years. If anyone knew what to do in this situation, it would be him. Content with our game plan, I headed to the door to leave for work. I almost made it, but a couple of things stayed with me. I couldn't take off just yet. I needed some peace of mind, and the only way to attain it would be to confront Jess with a couple of questions. I sat back down at the kitchen table. Jess, hun, have you moved on? Are you past the miscarriage? She looked at me as if she was shocked I would even ask about that. She paused, but eventually lit up.
No, I guess not. I thought I was, but maybe I just bottled it up deep down and that's what's causing all of this. Maybe if I do move on, it will all stop. The sleep talking, my stress, all of it. I hope the shrink can help.
I put my hand on hers and held it for a brief moment before putting forth my much more awkward query. And you don't really want to kill me, right? She grabbed my hand and clenched it tight.
Of course not. How could you say that? I don't know why I've been saying those things in my sleep, but I love you. I always have.
I smiled. This put my mind at ease. The situation wasn't exactly a good one, but I felt like I was growing closer to Jess. Our bond couldn't be broken, not after this. We were finally tending to our old wounds, and I couldn't have been happier about it. I was elated. That night, our room was quiet for a good long while. No shuffling around, no getting out of bed, no nothing. It was peaceful. As such, I slept better than I had in months. Near the end of the night, however, the familiar sound of Jess crawling out of bed woke me up. It appeared that my good night's rest was too good to be true. Jess got out of bed as she normally did when she sleptwalked, but that's when the sound stopped. I didn't hear her walking around the room this time. I thought maybe she'd gone to the bathroom, but then I realized I hadn't heard the bedroom door open either. I decided it might be in my best interest to see what was going on. So I rolled onto my back, sat up, and rubbed my eyes to get a better view. There, at the foot of our bed, was Jess. She was standing still as ever, and looking directly at me. A batch of familiar words ensued. Being used to this routine by now, I attempted to coax her back to bed. "Honey, you're asleep. Come back to bed." She continued staring at me. She then replied with 2 words I will soon never forget.
I'm wide awake.
What do you mean you're awake?
That's right. In fact, I was never asleep any of the times you heard me talking.
I was baffled by my wife's statement. I looked at her in disbelief, unsure how to respond. "What are you talking about?" is all I could bring myself to say. She became hysterical and started crying.
I don't want a baby. I didn't want to move. I didn't want any of this. But I felt I had to because of you. I'm drowning in your life, so low beneath the water I can't even breathe.
I listened intently to what my wife was saying, but I couldn't find it in me to comfort her. I didn't know what she needed to hear, and I didn't know how to help.
And after I lost the baby, that was it. I changed. Having a living thing inside me just die like that was a hell of a thing to go through. My goals, my priorities, my emotions, they all changed. My whole world was different. I couldn't even close my eyes at night without seeing the face of our unborn child in my dreams. I can't take it anymore. I just can't.
I moved closer to my wife in an attempt to console her. She pulled out a kitchen's knife from behind her back, stopping me dead in my tracks. Hun, are you crazy? What are you doing? Put the goddamn knife down.
You think I didn't notice the shoebox under the bed?
I looked directly into her eyes. All I could see was hatred and tears. She truly didn't want me alive, and I could feel it. I knew Jess was distraught, but I had no idea to this extent. If only I had noticed. If only I'd paid more attention.
You made me want a baby. You did this to me.
She paused for a moment and wiped some tears away before continuing.
Don't you want to see our baby? I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. I bet it's a boy. I can see him now. Our beautiful son. He has your eyes. Can't you see it, honey? Don't you want to be there with me?
I couldn't believe it. My wife was farther gone than I could have ever guessed. She wanted to kill me and herself so she could be with our baby again. I needed to do something, and fast. Okay, hun, you're right. Let's do it. Jess's face lit up as I said this, but I was only trying to buy a little time. I slowly got out of bed so as not to alert her to my plan. Once I was standing in position, I quickly grabbed the comforter off the bed and tossed it at my wife. I then ran past her as quickly as I could. I felt a sharp jab in the process. Her knife had pierced the blanket and a little bit of my skin. Still, I made it out of the bedroom and into the bathroom, where I swiftly slammed the door and shut and locked it behind me. I was safe for the time being. I would have ran straight out of the apartment if I thought I could have made it, but we have a deadbolt on it, and it sometimes sticks. Chances are she'd have reached me before I could unlock the damn thing. Being stuck in the bathroom wasn't good enough for me. Jess jiggled the knob a few times in anger. Once she realized I had locked it, she began screaming and banging on the door as hard as she could. This lasted for all 3 minutes before she broke down and started crying. That's when she tried reasoning with me.
Don't you want to see our baby? I wonder if it's a boy or a girl. I bet it's a boy. I can see him now. Our beautiful son. He has your eyes. Can't you see it, honey? Don't you want to be there with me?
I didn't respond. Anything I could say wouldn't make a difference. Jess had gone off the deep end, and there was no way back up. I felt sorry for her, but in that moment I was feeling much more sorry for myself. All I could think about was getting the hell out of there. Jess stopped talking to me after a while. I heard her crying for a little bit, but eventually that stopped too. Silence began to fill our apartment, and half of me wondered for a split second if she had passed out or something, but my other half told me it could be all part of her plan. She wanted to lure me out, and then go for the kill when I least expected it. Without a clear course of action, I stayed put. It was all I could do. An hour passed, and then another. I was growing tired, but I didn't want to fall back asleep. For all I knew, that's what she was waiting for, and she could pick the lot without me noticing. Nice try, hon, but you'll have to do better than that. Even still, I could feel myself drifting off. I knew that eventually I would end up fast asleep. Whether it was actually a decent plan or the byproduct of exhausted brain, I decided that I'd have to make a run for it. I prepared as best as I could. I let the sink drip quietly, and I placed my hands under it. I threw water in my face in an effort to stay alert. I shut the bathroom light off and stayed in there for about 10 minutes or so my eyes could adjust to the dark. I fed myself the classic "it's now or never" pep talk, and then turned the bathroom knob. This was it. I opened the door slowly. I looked around and made a mental map of the apartment. Living room to my left, kitchen around the corner, then the apartment door. There was a recliner near the corner, so I had to be aware of that and not trip on my way out. I looked over at the bedroom and I noticed the door was shut. This was a good sign. Perhaps Jess locked herself in. Without thinking about it too much, I dashed out in haste. I ran straight for the living room couch, giving myself plenty of room for a wide turn. Upon turning, it was a straight shot to the apartment door, right past the kitchen. Jess was nowhere to be found. With this in mind, I sprinted towards the door. But when I ran past the kitchen, something impeded my escape, something sharp. Just as I was about to make my getaway, Jess came out from the kitchen and thrusted her blade into my shoulder. I fell back against the wall and screamed in agony. She'd been waiting there this whole time. I should have been more careful, I thought, in hindsight. I should have tippy-toed about and surveyed my surroundings a bit more. But I was tired and scared at the same time. Jess pulled out the knife, and instead of stabbing me again like I expected, she spoke.
Our baby will be so happy.
Jess was proud. She finally stabbed me. But it was clear she didn't have a plan past the first blood. Maybe she thought one stab is all it would take, or maybe she was just too tired to think straight. Either way, I took advantage of her absent-mindedness. Though it was painful to move, I bolted back to the living room. I purposely brushed against the recliner, making sure to get as close to it as possible without stumbling into it. Just as I had hoped, Jess followed me to a T. She collided with the chair and fell face first on the floor. I turned back and ran right over her. I reached the door and fiddled with the lock and got out of there quickly as I could. With the help of my neighbor, I called 911 and I was taken away on the stretcher. I lost a lot of blood, but they patched me up just fine. As for my wife, she didn't make it. She could have escaped before the authorities showed up, but she didn't. She cut open her wrist and bled out on the living room floor. Nothing would stop her from being with our baby. I guess in her mind, one parent was better than none. In the wake of all this, I don't know how to feel. I'm equal parts a wreck now that my wife's dead. As I am happy to be alive after escaping her, I keep blaming myself for what happened. But I could have never imagined it would have led to this. Though I may never get over what happened, I hope Jessica is happy. She doesn't have to feel trapped anymore. I love you.